Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a dream come true. I had the privilege of receiving the game in advance. I beat the game in around 50 hours of gameplay, and in this video I'll share with you what the experience was like. And regarding spoilers, don't worry, in this video I'll be using my own captures, but just from the beginning of the game, and then I'll also use official trailers and official gameplay, so what you see is either official or from the early parts of the game. First, I feel like it's important to talk about the classic Final Fantasy VII, which was one of the most important games in the gaming industry. It was originally released in '97 for the first PlayStation, and it was revolutionary, both because of the quality and depth of its story and gameplay, and also because of its pre-rendered cutscenes, which were very advanced at the time. The game was a huge success, and it was a super important pillar for the victory of the PlayStation 1 in the 5th generation of consoles, which also had the Nintendo 64 and the Sega Saturn as its main competitors. Final Fantasy VII also was the first RPG of many gamers.
例えばファンの方、今まで6までやった方にとっては、実は 2D のこのイラストライクなキャラクターの方が好まれるんじゃないかっていう考え方が強くあったので、そこはやっぱり 3D の CG の方に踏み切ったっていうのは非常に当時はチャレンジ分なことだったので、そこは逆にどう受け入れられるかっていうのは不安な部分は少しある。
Personally, I can say that the classic Final Fantasy VII had a huge impact on my life. It was a game that helped shape my personal preferences. The first RPG I played in my life was Super Mario RPG, but the second was Final Fantasy VII. And it was Final Fantasy VII that made me fall in love with the RPG genre. It deepened my passion for games even further and also helped me learn the English language. Without Final Fantasy VII in my life, I'm not sure if I would have become a member of the gaming industry or even if I would have been able to move abroad. And without Final Fantasy VII, the gaming industry as a whole would certainly be different, because, as I already said, the game was very important in establishing the first PlayStation as the winner of the 5th generation, and also it influenced and continues to influence many game developers to this day.
当時自分とか25歳とかなんですよね。で、そんな若造に初めてアートディレクションやらせて、で、その数ヶ月で、またそういう他の人たちもその 3D 初めてだらけなのに、それを数ヶ月で作ってリリースしろってかなりこの会社頭おかしいなとは思いました。まあでも、やっぱその時すごくやっぱり、才能あるタレントがいっぱいいたんで、やっぱそのエネルギーがその会社にやっぱ集まってきてたんで、そこはやっぱりまあ当時若かったからできたと思うけど、やっぱそのタレントが揃ってたってことはやっぱ強いですよね。
Because of the repercussions of the classic Final Fantasy VII, the idea of a remake of the game was a dream for many people. How would a game so amazing but limited by the PlayStation 1 hardware turn out if developed for more modern consoles? The dream of this remake was something very distant until at E3 2015, Square Enix announced the remake of the game at the Sony conference. Guys, I was at that conference, and I can say that it was quite emotional to watch the remake announcement live. What a moment.
You're not real. You're clown.
After many years in development, Final Fantasy VII Remake was released in April 2020, and the game was really good.
オリジナルのファンの方と、でやっぱりそれから20年以上時が経ってるので、新規の方もかなり多いだろうと。ですから昔からのファンの方と新しく今回7を遊ばれる方、この双方にバランスよく楽しんでもらえるものを提供しなきゃなというところが一番気を使ってたと思います。
For the relaunch of Final Fantasy VII, Square Enix divided the game into 3 parts, and the remake, which is part 1, takes the initial part of the game, which takes place in the city of Midgar, which initially took about 5 to 10 hours of gameplay in the classic, and that becomes a full-fledged game with more than 40 hours of gameplay. In relation to the classic Final Fantasy VII, the remake deepened each segment of the game with more elaborate story sections, expanded dungeons, and also new gameplay portions. Combat migrated from a turn-based system to real-time combat, The soundtrack became a mix of rearrangements of the classic soundtrack with new songs.
作のですね、音楽がとても素晴らしかったので、新しいシーンに対して、グラフィックの表現、カットシーンでの表現力が上がったので、音楽の方もそれに合わせる形で表現力をアップさせました。
And graphically, the game was amazing. Personally, I loved Final Fantasy VII Remake, including the DLC, which focuses on Yuffie, an optional character that we could recruit to the group in the classic Final Fantasy VII. And now, with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we have the sequel to Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I'll share with you how my experience with the game was. The game is coming out for the PlayStation 5 on February 29th and continues where Final Fantasy VII Remake ends. I considered it essential to play Final Fantasy VII Remake before playing Rebirth. I think the classic is optional, but you should play Remake before you play Rebirth. If you haven't played Remake, there are Final Fantasy VII Rebirth pre-order options that include Final Fantasy VII Remake. And for those who played Final Fantasy VII Remake at the time of the release but don't remember everything, don't worry, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth includes a summary of the events of the remake. And as I already said, Remake takes the events from the beginning of the classic game, which take place in Midgar, and it goes until the group manages to escape from Midgar. Rebirth begins right after the escape from Midgar and continues till the Forgotten Capital, so it goes till the end of Disc 1 of the classic Final Fantasy VII. In terms of development of game depth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is very much in line with the remake. A stretch of around 10 hours of gameplay from the classic turns into an experience of around 50 hours of gameplay when focusing on the main missions, doing just a few side quests, because with secondary quests, we can add many more hours to the experience.
They found us!
But there's a fundamental difference between Remake and Rebirth, which is a consequence of the structure of the classic Final Fantasy VII. The initial part of the classic in Midgar is considerably linear, and once we leave Midgar in the classic, the game becomes quite open. And I can say that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth manages to deal with this difference very well, bringing large regions with free exploration, just like in the classic.
Just look at it all. It's so green.
The open sections in Rebirth follow what a traditional open-world game would do. There are towers for us to climb and synchronize, special enemies for us to face, secret chests to find, and so on. Each region also has a Chocobo farm, and a specific Chocobo for us to find and tame. And the open areas also have NPCs with specific objectives for us to accomplish. I didn't find the free exploration areas revolutionary, but they are well built and fun to explore. And for those who prefer to focus on the story, going straight to the main objectives without paying attention to the secondary missions in the open areas is an option that's viable. And something important I think I should say is that the initial section of the game is an open area, which may give the wrong impression that the entire game will revolve around exploring open world segments. But after the initial 5 to 10 hours of gameplay, the game starts to have sections that are more linear and with more emphasis on the story. And for me, the game really shines with the linear, story-based segments more than in the open world sections. So here's a tip. Don't be fooled by the initial segment of the game. The game starts out good, but it gets way better than that once the open areas are more spread out between story-focused and linear segments.
Hey, get back here right now! Disguised itself as an island.
In terms of combat, the game is an evolution of what Final Fantasy VII Remake offered, including Yuffie's DLC. Each character has their own combat style. Cloud, for example, generally focuses on proximity, putting a lot of pressure on attacks, and he has a very fast moveset. Barret is the opposite of Cloud. He's very slow to move, and he works better at a distance. Yuffie is very eclectic, she can attack both up close and from afar. Tifa, super fast, she has very strong attacks, but she needs to be close to the enemies. Regarding combat gameplay, the square button attacks. Holding the square button activates an alternative attack.
Gotta go for it now.
The circle button dodges. Attacking after dodging usually results in a different attack than the normal attack. With R1 we can defend. Pressing R1 just before being hit deflects enemy attacks. And the triangle button activates special combat properties for each character. So a few examples of the triangle button. With Cloud, it changes his attack posture. With Barret, he fires a charged shot. Yuffie throws shurikens. Tifa performs special attacks. Aerith teleports away from enemies, and so on. All characters also have access to their own abilities. They can also use magic and items. Using those resources consumes an action bar, and we charge action bars by attacking, defending, parrying, and so on. Regarding character abilities, some are already unlocked. Cloud, for example, starts off being able to use Braver, which is a super strong attack. And Yuffie can start by allocating elementals to her shurikens, the ones that she throws at faraway enemies. But there are specific abilities associated with weapons, and these skills can be learned by using them in combat till they've been mastered. There are also synergy commands. The regular ones are used by holding R1 and pressing the face buttons. Synergy commands combine two characters for special action and can be offensive or defensive.
Don't overdo it.
And with synergy, there are also synergy specials, which need to be charged and combine two characters for a movement that usually causes a lot of damage and buffs the characters, such as granting the use of magic without consuming mana or increasing the number of action bars for a limited time. And finally, regarding combat, we can perform limits, which are super special attacks that we can use after charging the limit bar. And the limit bar is charged as we receive damage, put opponents under pressure or in a staggered state, and so on. Overall, I found the game's combat very fun. It's frantic, chaotic, and it encourages that we use each of the playable characters according to the opponents we're facing. And regarding opponents, the game has a large variety of enemies, including many sub-bosses and bosses. And maybe I've given you the impression that the combat system is too complex because there's a lot to do with it, but that's not the case. The game introduces the combat mechanics little by little, and also there are tutorials for each character in the combat simulator. I highly recommend you visit it so you can figure out how to play with each ally.
You're up.
That's enough regarding combat. Let's focus on other aspects, other elements of the game. The gameplay loop of Rebirth will, in general, alternate between combat, story, adventure, exploration, and a bit of puzzle solving. And there's also a lot of extra content from side quests and several minigames. Regarding the story, I won't say much in order not to spoil anyone's experience, but I can say that as a fan of the classic Final Fantasy VII, I was very satisfied with how the game presents the narrative, with how it takes elements from the classic game and rearranges them, delving deeper into the story. It is very faithful to the original material, but at the same time it brings some really cool new story elements, so I loved the story. Regarding adventure, exploration, a bit of puzzle solving, everything flows really well in a very natural way. As we move through the open sections, as we delve deeper into the linear segments, we have the freedom to explore hidden parts of the map, find resources, hidden chests, and so on. Everything, as I said, super organic, super natural. There are plenty of scenarios to explore, they are all super beautiful, so the exploration and adventure segments are very enjoyable. And even more so, considering that the soundtrack for this game is so good, it's wonderful. And hopefully you've noticed it, because this video features Rebirth's soundtrack. And still regarding audio, I played the game with English voiceovers and I really like the interpretation of each character. And another audio bit, I played the whole game with surround sound. The game audio mix is really good. So if you have access to a good home theater or soundbar, for sure you will enjoy the sound experience of the game. Regarding extra content, the game has a lot of fun things to do. There's a card game called Queen's Blood, which is lots of fun. The Fort Condor minigame returns from Final Fantasy VII Remake. There are pianos scattered throughout the game that you can play. In Gold Saucer, there's a lot to do because that's an amusement park. And my favorite part of Gold Saucer were the Chocobo races. They are extremely fun, and honestly, Chocobo races could be a spin-off standalone game. Lots of fun. And something that became very clear to me as I came across the extra content in the game, such as the Chocobo races, is the fact that this game, for sure, had a huge dev budget, because everything in this game, it's made with such care and attention. There are elements that appear in the game for about 5 to 10 minutes, and still they have an insane level of quality. And the graphics, oh my god, they are amazing. The game has 2 graphics modes, resolution mode and performance mode. I played everything in performance mode and I found it really good, really solid. Character models are beautiful, and not only the main characters, not only villains, important allies, even generic NPCs have good graphics. Not as good as tier 1 or tier 2 characters, but still good. And in terms of scenarios, the game is wonderful. I've already said, the game has a wide variety of scenarios, including open areas, cities, dungeons, and so on. And everything is beautiful, well designed. It's rare these days with games that are getting more and more expensive and time-consuming to develop to see a game with such a large number of environments. And because the game is not photorealistic, neither in terms of settings nor in terms of characters, I think this game will age really well. It's something that doesn't usually happen with photorealistic games that normally become dated visually. And as I said in the beginning of the video, the game took me about 50 hours to beat, and I played it focusing on the main missions, doing some side quests that were on my way in the open parts of the game. I didn't deviate much. The only extra content that I really focused on were the Chocobo races and a mini game that involved air acrobatics with Chocobos. Both Chocobo activities were really well built, lots of fun, and I feel like my gameplay time would have gone up to about 70 hours of gameplay if I had focused more on the optional content. Regarding difficulty, I played at normal mode, and in general I followed the missions a bit below the recommended level, and I managed to advance without any major issues for most part of the game. I had trouble in about 3 or 4 battles, but even the final boss I managed to defeat in my first try. I can say that my experience with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was wonderful. I feel very privileged, very honored to have had the opportunity to play this game in advance. It was one of my best gaming experiences ever, and I consider Rebirth better than Final Fantasy VII Remake. And even though I received my digital copy of the game free of charge, I had already pre-ordered the collector's edition as well as the game soundtrack in both CD and vinyl. And now that I've played through the game, I'm honestly even more excited to receive those pre-orders. If you enjoyed this video, I also recommend you watch my Final Fantasy XIII video. Thank you very much for watching.